So I chose an enigmatic and maybe a provocative topic because I know that people are busy talking to each other, and maybe this can break through the noise a little bit. I think I'm going to take a point of view that, since I'm up here on stage, which is maybe will come across as a little bit more controversial, but that's sort of to provoke conversation. And I'd love to continue that conversation. So let's start and imagine all of us that we're in a classroom, and we sit down at our desk, and the teacher puts a test in front of us, and we reach for that pencil in the days of pencils, and we're nervous, as we always are when we take a test, maybe when we're 10 years old. Now, it turns out, when we're looking through this test, that you know how to answer some of the questions, but not all. And so then the question is, why? And the reason is that if the test is different than the material you memorized, and if you set out to memorize the material and not learn it, you're going to fail. Memorization is part of what we're going to be talking today, and memorization in the context of data. Memorization is an attempt to set data collection and then data retrieval on a fixed track. Think about it as something that's immovable and is by definition not flexible. So that means that in a memorization framework, the answer always has to be in the same place. Learning is different. Learning is developing links between one fact and another, links that become layers, and then networks. And we know very little about how the brain really operates, but we think this is how the brain operates. It's a giant network, a very rich kind of network. If you learn the material, you can then use that learning to fill in gaps, to infer, to predict, to do very well on a test, even if you didn't directly study anything that is set out there to be assessed. Now, what separates memorization from learning is this sense of meaning. When you memorize a fact, it's arbitrary, interchangeable. It could be one fact or another. When you learn something, again, it's linked to other facts through this logic, this network that becomes richer and richer and richer. Computers are very good at memorizing data, but computers cannot memorize what they don't see. Computers have become increasingly effective at learning from data. Computers can learn to classify and predict things that they haven't observed directly. So just like we were when we were 10 years old and we're taking that test, just like the 10-year-old version of us, if a computer has learned from material, it can actually fill in blanks, and it can make inferences and make very high-quality predictions. Across the world, data's primary use for organizations is still reporting. And this is sort of 10 years, some people would argue 20 years, into what was supposed to be a revolution in how data is going to be used. Systems for reporting should be the first layer of how data is used, not the last. And that's because reporting looks backwards. Systems for reporting data show a partial, often inaccurate view of the past. Why is that? It's because reporting is an attempt to memorize the world. Memorization is risky. It's all or nothing. If the right fact wasn't collected, that system built for data collection and data reporting is going to fail. These systems, by design, cannot fill in gaps, cannot make inferences. Systems that learn can deal with the uncertainty of the world. And all of us recognize that the world is perhaps increasingly uncertain, increasingly volatile. So I'm going to give an example from our work of a system that learns and the benefit, particularly the benefit in a setting where there's very little to memorize. The Ministry of Health and Sanitation of Sierra Leone didn't have an up-to-date picture of their health system. So precisely the sort of effort that usually a data reporting mechanism is supposed to solve for. And that means that they didn't know where the health system was resilient and where it was under-resourced. They didn't know what type of care could be delivered or should be delivered at different points across the map. So we deployed our core product, which we are still deploying in Sierra Leone, and this is a product for building self-improving supply and demand networks. And the result is visibility at every scale: water quality, backup power, equipment, characteristics of each site, current staffing and capabilities, where staff are today, and where they should be shifted tomorrow to best meet demand. We began with high-quality survey data for about 5% of sites. So think of this as beginning with the answers to 5% of the questions. So it's a partial answer key. And then the core machine learning was then used to piece together other sets of data to learn a richer picture of this whole network, a whole health system. So you start with 5% and you slowly expand to visibility for the health system as a whole. And that again means demand at the site level, characteristics at the site level, what's possible at each point on the map. On top of that, we deployed a system for change detection. So learning from shifts in forest cover or shifts in ground cover, which oftentimes indicates environmental change, which can give us indication of the capabilities of a specific site to deliver care. So this is a system that's learning from data that the government collects. It's also learning from data that sits outside of the four walls of the government and piecing together those different partial views to get a much richer picture of what's there today and what is going to happen tomorrow. And in the context of a system that learns, each additional point of data brings exponential value. So in a reporting framework, if we add a data point, we get nothing more, nothing less. We get one more data point. In the context of a system that learns, for each additional data point, for 10% more data, we might yield 30 or 40% greater accuracy in understanding demand or in predicting the capability of a specific site to deliver life-saving care. So I want to reinforce this notion of sort of an exponential boost, even in a setting of very limited data. On top of that new map, we deployed next-generation demand forecasting. And this is improving those demand forecasts by anywhere from 30 to 40 to 50 to 60% for routine immunization and essential medicines. And this matters because this is a setting where there's scarce resources and there's uncertainty around demand. So now the government knows exactly where to send what and in what quantity. The same problem in the state of California. Limited visibility into thousands of federally qualified health centers across the state. Our customer had the same question. This started in the context of COVID-19 vaccination campaigns. Where do we send what quantity of COVID-19 vaccines? Which sites are prepared to safely store and administer those vaccines? Just like in Sierra Leone, we started with a very small portion of high quality, what we call labeled data. So again, sort of the answer key for 5–10% of the sites. In 6 weeks, we delivered to our customer visibility for the first time into 100% of the sites. And this is visibility into what's there right now, staffing to equipment, to cold chain capability or capacity, all the way into the characteristics of demand at the site level. So I'll conclude here with a sort of taking this statement in a slightly blunter direction. institutions are never going to be able to collect enough data to be able to report directly on the most important questions of our time. So the sort of questions that motivate everybody here to do what they do. And this is the paradigm that we've been operating in for now 10 years, which is collect data, report on data, and that's really the limits of how we use data. The meaningful problems, again, the kind of problems that we devote our lives to, are not comprehensible through platforms that only collect and report on data. Meaningful problems are inherently multidimensional. The good news is that we already have, in every setting on Earth, enough data to build and deploy systems that learn. And that means systems that can start to fill in those gaps and even give us a sense of what to do next. What and where do we need to invest? Where do we need to send which resources? I want to suggest that part of the barrier to deploying a paradigm around learning systems rather than data collection systems, full stop, lies in language and lies in the metaphors that we use. Data is the new oil. This was a common adage. It was first said in 2006 by a British mathematician, and alongside the rise of Google and Facebook at the time, it led people to believe that data, like oil, is immensely valuable in this sort of raw form. The second part of the statement of the British mathematician is worthwhile in this context. He went on to say, data is valuable, but if unrefined, it cannot really be used. In 2000, last year, Tim O'Reilly proposed a new metaphor. Data is sand. So ubiquitous, valueless on its own, but becomes immensely valuable through skillful processing. It cannot be memorized. None of us would set out to memorize a desert full of sand, but it can be used to build incredible things. Silicon is made of sand, and silicon is the major element in computer chips. Computer chips allow software to learn from data. So perhaps if we take this framework of data as sand, we see it as a raw input, which again doesn't speak on its own, has no value on its own, rather than data as a conclusion, rather than data as something which on its own has value. So I'll conclude there. Thank you.